Hi! In today's video, I wanted to take a moment and discuss my personal philosophy on inclusion of children with special needs in the general education classroom. I'll probably get a little more specific into how I think students with special needs should be included in music classrooms, since that's what I'm studying to teach. But I'll try and keep it broad as just a general philosophy of education of all children, regardless of race, socioeconomic status, and disabilities or developmentally normal students. The long and short of it is that I believe inclusion is the most important. It's outlined in IDEA and in our legal system that all students, especially those students with special needs, with disabilities of any kind, deserve their place in the classroom. What we have done in the past for students with special needs is inexcusable, and they didn't deserve to be shut away or not given an education. Every child deserves an education regardless of their cognitive abilities or their disabilities. And so I believe that inclusion is the best way to give these students the legally protected education that they deserve. I know that in some cases with certain behavioral disorders or with students that unfortunately have been so far behind due to lacking education in the past, being included in the general education classroom 100% of the time isn't possible yet. But I think it's something to work through or work towards with all students, making sure that wherever they're at, even if it's in a pull-out class or with a paraprofessional, that they're in that least restrictive environment and they're able to grow and explore and learn with their peers. And not just their peers with special needs, but their peers that are developmentally normal. But it's not just my personal beliefs that inform this. I've been reading a lot of articles to prepare for this talk. One such is a journal article published in Psychological Science in 2014 called Peer Effects in Early Childhood Education, Testing the Assumptions of Special Education Inclusion. It was written by a group of 4 scientists with Laura M. Justice leading the writing of this article. Pretty much this is their summation of an experiment they did with a group of early childhood children among a couple of different classes. I believe 55% of these students in the study were students with special needs. And what they did is they tested all the students for language abilities in the fall and the spring, and then compared the increase or I don't think any scores decreased. So if any of the scores stayed the same, they compared that as well. And what they found is that many of these peers with special needs in their classes, when they were in classrooms with trying to find my words here, developmentally normal children, those children that did not have special needs, that the students with special needs excelled with their higher achieving classmates. And that's, they deduced that it was because the children were getting to interact more with their peers and have, more social practice, more language practice than they would one-on-one with a teacher or a paraprofessional. And so it shows how not only is inclusion something that the law tells us is good for students, there is scientific research to show how these students grow off of each other, and it's not just, oh, well, they need to be there, it's, well, it helps them to be there. But we don't want to just focus on students with special needs. One of the articles I read from the British Journal of Music Education, it talks specifically about inclusion in music education. And it's talking about how it's not just enough to have a child in a wheelchair present in a musical ensemble, or to have almost like these PR stunts to show, oh, we're inclusive. It's more to make sure that every kid has a meaningful experience in the music classroom. And this applies not just to students with special needs, but students with low socioeconomic backgrounds, students of different race and culture. It's asking us as music teachers to not just follow the letter of the law with inclusion, but to truly make all our students feel included in our classrooms. And I think that's very important, and that's why I'm so adamant about having as many kids as possible in that general classroom. As a music teacher, I have been taught how to be very adaptive in how I instruct and how to change on the fly to best benefit my students both musically and as they grow socially in the class. And it just makes sense to not just focus on that letter of the law of following IDEA, but truly serving all of my students. And there was a similar, pardon me, my words were lost all of a sudden. There was a similar theme in another article that I read by Lorna Idle toward inclusion of special education students in general education. And instead of conducting any scientific experiment, it was simply her going and interviewing 8 different schools that were on a continuum of little to no inclusion to 100% inclusion of all their special needs students in the general education classroom. And one interesting thing is when she asked all these teachers about how they felt with accommodating students with challenging needs, students with special needs, students at risk of failure, there were teachers at this school that was very new in inclusion that weren't including students with special needs in the classroom almost at all. I think there were only a very small percentage that were in the general education classroom at any time in the day. And those teachers found themselves to be very skilled at making adaptations for their students, which doesn't seem to line up with what was actually happening in the classroom. Where another elementary school, the teachers had 100% inclusion of all their students with special needs in the classroom. They had a universal design for learning set up, and they were teaching to every single child in the best way possible. And yet those teachers, 21% of them reported that they still needed more practice in these skills. And I think that's an important thing to be aware of as educators. If we're truly trying to grow for the students, if we're truly trying to make sure that we are giving them the best education possible, then we're going to be constantly growing. There is not one set method that we can apply to every student on the autistic spectrum. There's not one method I can apply for every student who has cerebral palsy. There's not one method for students who are deaf, for students who are at risk of failing, for students from a specific socioeconomic background or culture. I need to be constantly learning as an educator to best serve them, especially in the music classroom where I have a chance to teach from a number of different musical backgrounds in different cultures and nations. And one thing that has really helped me as a pre-service teacher in this growth of teaching in an inclusive classroom. This is a book specifically about teaching music to students with special needs, but in it goes over the legislation in America about public education and how we've come so far in including all students, especially those with special needs. And then in the second and third part, it's leading you through practical classroom adaptations and modifications that help students with special needs, but also create that universal design for learning that we've been talking about in class. So as a sum up of everything I believe specifically in my music classroom, my future music classroom, that every student should be included in some form or another. My goal is to have everyone making music in the general classroom. But if we can't get there, then I'm going to find that least restrictive environment that is best for them and is helping them to grow, to not just get less than trivial growth year to year, but to actually flourish in my classroom. And yeah, thank you very much for listening to me talk. Have a great evening.